There are still some more tags that we need to learn about. Specifically, there's one that's used for formatting a lot that we really need to dabble into that's called a table. Now, table tags tend to be fairly complex, so we're going to have to sort of work our way through this gently. To begin with here, I have just another blank HTML file ready, called it example3.html. And I want to bring in my boilerplate that I made before. You'll remember HTML-BP is my little snippet I've set up. And I've also gone a little bit further with this. I went ahead and decided, you know what, let's include the header, the section, and the footer stuff in there too. So remember, you can do that yourself too, over in your snippets. It's Atom snippets, or I believe it'll be file snippets on the Windows side. And I just came in here and added in the header section and footer parts just a moment ago so that I'd have those available. Once I bring this in, you usually do need to customize it. So let's call this HTML tables. And the section will be table tags. And there are quite a few of them that we're going to have to work with. And in the section here, let's call it my first table. And we're ready then inside the section to add a table. Tables can be very straightforward if we don't try and get too complicated with it, but of course most tables don't fit a nice sort of row column grid structure. They start to deviate from that pretty quickly. We're not going to do that initially. Initially we're going to assume that they all have a nice neat structure that fits a perfect grid of a certain number of rows and columns. Not surprisingly, this is all going to begin with a table tag. And you'll notice here that it does offer all kinds of little extra things that you could do if you'd want to. We're not going to play with any of those yet, but some of those you might actually find helpful. There are some built-in snippets for tables that get the basics set up for you. You might also want to create your own snippet for tables because there's a lot to type when you're making a table. Underneath the table tag, there are only, I believe, 3 different sections, maybe 4 different sort of children tags that you can have. The first ones are really similar to the ones that you can have under HTML, namely t-head and t-body. There is also t-foot for a footer. All 3 of these are such that you're defining the header section, the body, and the footer, but they all have T's before them instead of being just head or body or footer or header. These are things that should always be children of a table tag, and there really aren't too many other things you would ever put as children of table. One exception to that is caption, which allows you to caption a table if you wanted to put a little bit of extra detail. This is always must go right after the table tag, the open tag, and can be used to put some caption below it. We'll add that later after we've sort of made our table. The t-head part is still part of the table, and you would put any rows inside the t-head that you want to be header rows that would have labels for each column. And that would allow you to sort of structure it appropriately. The t-body part contains all the other rows that are not part of the head that contain actual data. You can also have multiple t-bodies within one table if you want, but you can only have one t-head. Similarly, t-foot is rows at the bottom of the table that are specifically designed to be special rows. Perhaps this is where the totals go. Perhaps this is where you're doing something to at least set it apart. Putting them in t-head or t-foot makes you able to style them a little bit differently, and that's why they provide these. You can only have one t-head and one t-foot. T-head are the first set of rows, t-foot are the last sets of rows, but you can have many t-bodies. You always must have one t-body. The t-body is absolutely required. Excuse me. You must have at least one of these. Note, remember, this is how you write a comment in HTML. For t-head, it's optional, and that you can have at most 1. And here you can have 1 or more. And then the t-foot is the same way. You can have at most 1. Most of the tables I create, I only have one T head and one T body. I've on rare occasion needed to create multiple T bodies within one table, but that was a very unusual situation. I haven't had a situation yet where I really wanted to create a T foot. So I'm going to take the T foot out and stick with just one T head and one T body. Now the data that goes in our table is always going to be defined first in rows and then in columns. Now you will note if you dig into the documentation for tables in HTML, there is actually a tag for column. However, this particular tag is not used very often. Usually you define things in terms of rows rather than columns, so keep that in mind. You'll find it gets very difficult if you mix the two. I highly recommend sticking with rows. This means I must define an entire row before I ever define the next one. So rows are defined with the TR tag. And I like to go ahead and put it on a single line, just for brevity's sake. Within the row, you then need to define the data for each column going across that row. This is usually done with one of two tags, either TD, I actually don't know why it's D, maybe that's data, table data. Or if it is a header, you can say TH. And TH and TD tags are usually referred to as the table cell tags because what goes between these will show up as a single cell inside of your table. Let's go ahead and put these on their own lines because I want to add some more information. So TR here can be inside of T head, T body, or T foot. And you can have as many of them as you want rows in your table. The only allowed children of TR are TD or TH. So these must go inside of TR. And those are the only children that are allowed. It's either TD or TH. You can't put anything else in there. This is just like when you have a UL or an OL. The only thing that's allowed as a child of those are LI. The thing is true of TR. It expects to see either TD or TH inside of it. Now, initially here, I'm in the T head section. In the first row, I really want to use header cells here, so I'm going to use TH rather than TD. Now you'd think you're in T head, surely it knows that these are header cells. Well, yeah, and there would be ways with CSS that we could force them to look like header cells, but all the same, go ahead and mark it TH. It's good to be consistent here because TH is meant for cells that are headers. Let's put across the top here, I'm going to leave the first one empty. Now, it's still a good idea to put something in it. So I'm going to put a single space. And you'll remember this is for a non-breaking space, i.e. a required space that it can't take away. We put that in there because we don't want it to accidentally delete the cell on us or not show what's in that cell. So we'll put it there. Then let's put some names in here is what we'll do. First I'll put mine, then some other names. And what else can we put? Okay, there we go. So these are names that go in a single row across the top of my table. For now, that's looking pretty good. I want to go ahead, let's put one row in the body as well. Here, because I'm in the body, I'm going to use TD rather than TH. And here, let's just put some, let's assume these are sort of scores. Now, the very first one here in the column, I want this to be sort of a label. So we'll call this test 1. And then we'll put some scores across here. Let's say I did very good. 2, 3, 4, 50, 78. 99, something like that. We want to make sure that we have the same number of columns here as we do up here. So what do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tables should always be square inside of HTML. Now there will be little tricks you can do to make them not appear to be square, but you should still never do it unless you really intend to and you really know what you're doing. Most of the time you want them to be square, just like a table would be in a normal document. You wouldn't have ones with varying numbers of columns in each row. All right, it's time to take a look at this. I'm going to go ahead and hit the magic key to open in browser, and here it is. Here's my first table. I'm Seth, Frida, Austin, Daquan, and then here's test 1 scores. So technically this is a table, and if we were to highlight over it, you can kind of see how the cells are broken up here. But it doesn't look very satisfying. This is actually a fairly recent thing. It used to be that all of these tables had sort of default styling on them that made them look pretty good. But nowadays, the default styling on a table is very ick. It doesn't look like what you'd really want it to at all. It doesn't have any borders around any of the cells. There's no lines drawn between them. This creates a bit of an issue. So let's see if we can sort of clean that up. Now, one of the first things I'm noticing here is that I didn't get test 1 to look like a header. Now, here's where some of the terminology is a bit problematic. I want test 1 and all the names of the tests themselves be sort of a header column, but I don't have any easy way to put it in the T head because I can only break it down by rows. This is where that TH cell really helps you. I'm going to switch this one to be a TH cell so that it knows it is sort of still a header. And if I do that, now when I refresh this, it gets that bold styling just like these did because it's a TH cell. So when in doubt, use the TH cell, and that'll at least make that one cell a header. Now the other thing I want to be able to do here is make this look reasonable. This unfortunately gets us over into a new area. Namely, it's going to take us into the area of styling. Instead of just specifying the sort of meaning and intention behind all of this content, like I want this to be a particular row and here's the different columns in that row, that's all I'm describing here, I need to tell it now how I want it to look. This is normally something that comes up in the next section when we talk about CSS. And normally it's something that we want to keep separate. We don't want to mix our sort of, this is called semantic meaning, which is the meaning behind all of it, our intention behind our content, and the way it looks, the way it's either laid out on the page or the way it's rendered vis-a-vis colors and styling. So we normally keep that pretty much separate in an entire section, but we've got to do a little bit of it here or we're going to go nuts. So let's go ahead and put a little bit of styling in this. We're going to do this up at the top inside the head. I mentioned way back in one of the very first videos that one of the tags you're allowed up here is style. Inside the style tag, you can put CSS rules that allow you to change the appearance of anything that appears inside the body. That's exactly what we want to do right here. We want to take our table and make it look nice. So the first thing we're going to do is tell it, I want to change the appearance of the table tags on this page. And so this would now be applied to every single table tag. I use curly braces to then define what I want it to look like. Inside the curly braces will be a set of rules. We'll go into much more detail about this in the next section, but not right now. The first thing I want to do is give it a border. So I'm going to say border, and I'm going to say that I want it to be 1 pixel, px, solid, and black. And then I just give it a semicolon. So this says make a solid 1 pixel black border around my table. Let's see if that worked. It did. This put a nice border around the entire table for me, which helps a little bit. I'd also like to get borders around in the in-between space, though. I don't quite have that yet. That means every single TH and TD, I'd like to have a border as well. So I can specify those too. I just separate them by columns here, TH, TD. Let's give them a border too. Now we're getting somewhere. There's still this odd little bit of space in between everything, and that's not an accident. By default, that's the way they like to do these particular styles here. So at this point, we'd like to tell it, don't do that. Let's go ahead and not leave these different borders for the cells separated. Let's compress them down into one single border between neighboring cells. So instead of having 2 here, there would just be 1 that's shared between the 2 cells. There is also a way to do that. Let me see here. I always forget what this one's called. It's called border collapse. And I'd like to set it to be collapse. Now this is something that gets set on the table itself and not on the TH or the TD. So to achieve that, you can see here we should really make a whole separate one that's just for border collapse. So let's do that. Oop, styling a little off there, tabbing's a little off. Let's pull that down. Here's another trick, by the way. If you highlight a bunch of these and hit tab, it doesn't replace it with a tab character. It moves it in and out. If you hold down Shift and Tab, it moves it back. So there we go. We can get it looking nice. So for all tables, I want to apply border collapse to be collapse. And for table TH and TD, I want to give them all a border. That's what that's going to do. And so this should now take this and shrink them down. And it does. Now we're getting somewhere. Still not a very pretty table, but at least we can see the lines between things. That does help a lot. From here on out, I'm not going to mess with the style anymore. We just put these up there so that our table looks nice. Right now we want to keep messing with tables. Let's say we want some more rows. So now I'd like to include other tests or other grades in all of this. So I'm going to do a little copy paste action. Let's switch this to test 2, this one to test 3. And then let's adjust data a little bit here. Let's say this one's now 80. Let's say this one, we had 3 people that did really poorly on this one. Let's say something like that. So we'll build it up kind of like that. So we've got test 1, test 2, test 3, and then some numbers for all of those as our data. Save that, we bring this back up. Here's our table getting bigger and better. Some other things I'd like to do to this. Yeah, the aesthetic person in me cannot stand to have this looking too wonky. I'd like to take all of the TDs and give them a fixed width. So let's do that. Let's say TD width of maybe, let's try 30 pixels. Let's see if that gets them all looking nice. Oh, that doesn't work. I think we have to apply it to both TD and TH, I imagine. Yes, but 30 pixels is way too small. Let's try 50. There we go. And maybe a little bit more than 50 even. Let's try 60. There we go. You'll notice here too that all of these numbers are being left aligned, which is a bit odd. The things that are marked as headers are being centered. I'd kind of like to get the data in the middle here centered as well. So let's do that. I can say text align, and let's make it center for all TD and TH cells. TH cells already do that, but now we'll get the TD cells too. There we go. This is making me feel at least a little more calm. So now we've got our nice set of spaced data here. So this is your basic, nicely spaced table. Let's just review what we did here. All of this styling stuff might seem a little bit foreign. We'll get into that in the next section, exactly how all of this works. This is cascading style sheets, or CSS. It's very powerful, but most of the time you'll just be doing a few basic things in this class. There are entire other classes that go into much more detail about CSS that we won't do in this class. Down here, everything begins with the table tag. The table tag first has a T head, which you sometimes won't have, but I do in this case. Inside that, I have one TR tag, which is the single row of our header. And inside that, I've got an empty cell, which I put a non-breaking space in so it wouldn't be invisible, and then several names. These are all TH tags because I want them to be rendered like they are headers. And TH is what we use for header cells. Then you can have one or more T-body sections. I'm going to just have one. Usually you just have one. And inside that, one or more rows. Here's our row, our first row. The first item is still a header because that first column is a header. And then the rest are scores, which are just standard TD because that's our basic table data. We have another one, again, header followed by data, header followed by data. And then we close the body. At this point, I could have a T-foot if I wanted to specify some rows at the bottom that were going to be a little different from all the others, but this time I won't. Notice that this all gets rendered still as one continuous table, where the first one is a header row, and then the rest are body rows. And there could also be a footer row if we wanted it to, but it's still one continuous table. You can really only have one table per table tag, despite being able to split them into header and body and footer. Splitting them up like that will allow us to do fancy things with styling later on, but it doesn't do anything with the default browser settings. The next thing we need to learn about with tables is how we start making them look a little more fancy or modern. There are some times, this might be a bit of a weird use case the way I'm doing it here, but there are some times where the data that shows up in your table is such that you'd like to combine two cells into one. For example, Seth here, me, got 100 on the first two tests. I really don't need to list that twice. I could just put a single 100 and have it take up both cells. When that happens, we say that a cell is spanning multiple rows. It's still one cell, but it's going to span two rows. And so we are able to do this by specifying a special attribute on that cell. What we would want to do is go find the very first cell, and that's going to be the one that is at the top leftmost. In this case, it's going to be that very first 100 that belongs to Seth on test 1. So Seth is the, if we look at this here, it's the second cell in the second column, and test 1 is right here. It's this row. So that's this one. On that, we want to specify a row span. And this allows us to tell it, hey, this cell should span more than one row. In this case, we want it to span 2 rows. Now, if we were to just do that, we could save it, we could go ahead and then refresh this. It's going to look a little weird. It did, in fact, take that cell and make it span 2 rows, but what happened here? All of a sudden, this got scooted out. Well, the problem was we forgot to remove the other cell. And this is where this gets kind of weird. A change up here suddenly affects this row down here. It's now going to have a cell hanging down from the row above it, and that means we need to leave space for that. I like to do it like this. Space for row span. Put a little comment in there that reminds you there's a row spanning down from above right there, and so you need to leave room for that. You still want this to add up to the same number of columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. The students might have noticed it was actually warning me down here that I had one row that had 6 cells as soon as I did that, and that was the reason why. So if I do that, now it renders correctly, and I've made this one span 2 here. So that's how we would make it span a row. Now, of course, sometimes values don't go across rows, they go across columns. And there's a little predictability here. Here on test 2, a lot of people got 50s. Maybe they were copying off each other, I don't know. But apparently they should have been copying off of me. But let's go ahead and see if we can get that to combine into a single cell. Again, it would be a little weird to list it this way if this were a real table of values, but it's just an example, right? So let's not stress it. So let's take these 3 and see if we can get them to span across columns, specifically 3 columns. So here are those 3 values. They're in that second row again. And so we want to find the very first one. And in this case, that's going to be the leftmost value, the one for Frida. It comes right after that row span from above. Here, we're going to say COL span, column span, equals 3 this time, because we want it to span across 3 values. Now, once again, it's going to warn you here. You have a table row with 7 columns wide, which exceeds the count of the first row, which was 5. And so it thinks something's wrong, and in fact, it's right. There is something wrong. We need to get rid of those 2 extra columns. And then again, you probably want to go ahead and put some sort of note in there so you understand why they aren't there. So space for col span. This usually isn't so bad. When you're doing column spans, the one that's spanning is right next to it, so you can usually figure it out. It's row spans that are really far apart. So, but still, it's a good idea to put a note in there just so you don't forget, or if someone else is looking at your code, they know what's going on. And come back over, refresh, boom. We've now got that spanning across 3 columns and applying that value to all 3 of them. That's the basic of tables. You'll find that tables are really handy for making things fit a very rigid grid-like layout. But those among you who have any experience with actual graphic design and layout will probably also know that rigid grid-like layouts are actually not all that good. unless you're designing a calculator or something where the layout of something needs to actually fit the same size for everything. Most of the time, that's not what you want. Consequently, you'll find most people discourage the use of tables except to present very neatly organized data. Now, we're going to do that plenty of times. We will have a time we want to show data. We'll use a table to show it. But you should be discouraged from using tables to define the layout of elements on your page. This used to be common practice about 10 years ago. People would do this all the time to lay out an entire page, to position images, and to make those images all connect together seamlessly. It is very much discouraged, almost belligerently so, among web developers nowadays. So I would encourage you to avoid that practice just so you don't make any enemies. I really don't care. If you do it in my class, you'll get full credit. But all the same, what we really want to make sure we can do here is wrestle all these tags. Remember, we've got table, its children, t-head, t-body, and t-foot. And then inside that, rows that are defined with TR, and then cells that are defined with either TH or TD. It's a whole mess of tags. Here, let's see how many we have here. We start at line 30, and we go all the way down to line 66. 36 lines, 37 lines of code to make this rather small portion of our web page here. It's going to feel like a lot of typing. Consequently, you'll find there are tools out there that will actually generate a table for you if you give it a certain number of rows and columns, tell it how many headers you want, it'll spit out all that code, and then you can just type in your data inside of it. It's also a good candidate for scripting, and we'll absolutely be doing that. Later on, when we have a whole bunch of data to present, we'll use JavaScript or PHP to generate our rows and our cells so that there isn't nearly as much typing going on. And that's everything we're going to talk about tables for now.